Hey folks, welcome back. Hope you're doing well out there. So in today's video, I wanted to continue this kind of theme and this discussion around mystical experiences, which I think are central and core to the psychedelic experience and their role in the bigger picture of our healing, trauma resolution, therapeutic, personal development journey, right? Where do mystical experiences fit into this? Where are they helpful? Where are they perhaps not as helpful? This is what I want to discuss today. And I want to share this with you just to create more context around mystical experiences, because I think they do get kind of overhyped in a certain sense or kind of blown out of proportion in terms of our expectations of them. And as someone who has gone deep down the rabbit hole, both of mystical experiences and of trying to heal my own trauma, I have some thoughts about this. So I want to kind of render the reality of this territory to you so that you're better informed of perhaps one person's opinion, at least, on where mystical experiences fit in. So if this interests you, please join me for the conversation. Okay, off the cuff discussion here today. I'm just going to kind of let her rip. I'm not really thinking too hard about it, just kind of pulling from my experience. Hopefully I will be eloquent enough, concise enough. I know some of you like it when I'm providing very tight, clean, short bits of information. Others of you don't mind the kind of expansive conversations that I tend to be prone to. I get it. People are people. Not everyone's communication style is the same, but this is heads up, I guess, that this is probably going to be one of these videos where I'm riffing a bit. Obviously, I'm launching a course here about mystical experiences and with a guided session in the center for you to follow along and listen to and hopefully have a mystical experience with. There's a bunch of prep material in there. I'll be telling you more about the structure of the course in another video. There's a bunch of prep material and exercises you can do to kind of prime your nervous system. There's integration material and aftercare material. I feel like it's a really well-rounded package for what it is. But in today's video, I want to really explore a very honest question, which is kind of anti-marketing in a sense. I'm trying to render the reality of the role of mystical experiences to you as best I can, rather than just sell you on the idea of doing this or sell you on mystical experiences as being the be all end all, which I think it's easy to arrive at that conclusion because of their depth and their profundity. But I want to try to give you a real clear picture of the role of mystical experiences in healing. So let's go ahead and get into it here and just start talking about it. So if you've watched my channel for a while, or if you've read my Reddit posts, some of you are coming from Reddit, you'll probably already know that I am someone, and if you saw my recent video about my own first mystical experience at 17, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, aka the psychedelic experience and all that, you'll know that I had my first mystical experience very young, that it ignited a passion for spiritual growth, spiritual practices, studying the mind, psychology, learning more about what we are as human beings. And you'll also know, if you're more broadly familiar with me and my channel, that I come from a background of complex trauma, right? Which I don't really want to go into the specifics of right now. I have respect for other people involved. But basically, there were events in my early life. There was relational dynamics. There's a bunch of stuff that added up to me having an effect of complex trauma in my nervous system that I didn't entirely know was there. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know what it was. And so when psychedelics came into the picture in my life in my kind of mid-teens and mystical experiences at 17, for me, there was a temptation, of course, to go there, probably driven out of trying to self-heal from my complex trauma, right? So there's this interesting question here, and it's beyond me, right? Because in my own lived experience, I know hundreds and hundreds of people who I've seen who are both spiritual practitioners and psychedelic users, and have personal trauma that they're trying to work through. I train around psychedelic therapy. I've talked to other therapists about this. I've talked to trainers and underground teachers about this. This is something I'm exploring a lot, and as psychedelic potential legalization is kind of a movement happening worldwide right now. And there's looking at, and there's an emerging understanding of complex trauma as a thing and how that plays out for people. And now we're looking at, how does mystical experiences, which are kind of the extreme end of psychedelic use, to be honest here, how these obviously have some sort of positive mental health benefits and impacts. I just shared a video from my course recently that kind of alludes to that. There's clearly evidence, scientific data that mystical experiences can positively impact your mental health. And yet, my experience when I was younger, and quite frankly, through my 20s and my 30s, was that I would definitely have profound, deep mystical experiences, psychedelic induced or through meditation, through other practices. And it didn't change my underlying trauma symptoms, right? That's the reality that I knew, right? And there was kind of a frustrating, confusing, desperate, kind of maddening quality to that for me. And that I felt like I was doing it wrong, or maybe the next trip was going to be the one that was really going to bust it open and create all the healing for me. Or, I'm so close. I know what it is to be operating at such a pristine, high vibrational, deeply connected level in my nervous system. And yet I fall back into these patterns of dysfunction over and over, right? And quite frankly, then looking around me at my friends and seeing the same thing, right? I would go to Burning Man or go to wherever and I'd see my friends struggling with relationship dramas and traumas and, drug addictions and dysfunctional behavior and some serious acting out of childhood shit with other people. And these are people who are dedicated spiritual practitioners who are very serious about their meditation and their yoga and their lifestyle and their reading and their learning, and they're doing the energetic practices, and they're they're going to ayahuasca retreats, or they're doing psychedelics ceremonially and with intention. They're doing all the things right and still not getting the real change in the place it needs to get, right? And so for me, this kind of has begged the question, so what's the deal here? How does this all fit according to me, current perspective, right? Here's what I would say to you. I would say that where a lot of trauma lives in people's nervous systems is really in our attachment system. That there's a deep connection between trauma and feeling connected with other people, with the way we're related to, with how alone we feel or unalone, with how seen or not seen we feel. Trauma is largely connected to our attachment system. Not 100%, but the attachment system is a big key that can either create trauma if we were not treated properly, or we continue to not be treated properly. It's also the doorway that unlocks the ability to resolve trauma, right? Now, often our attachment system is built into the lens through which we kind of view and see the world. So our subjective lens, our subjective map of meaning, our filter through which we interface. Sorry, a little glitch in the camera there while recording, kind of lost my train of thought, but essentially our attachment system shapes the filter through which we process life. That's basically what I was saying. Now, this filter that we process life through is often, it's like the lenses, it's like the cornea in your eye. It's the thing you see through. So you're not thinking about whether it's accurate or not, or healed or not, or damaged or not a big chunk of the time, which is to say that the set of assumptions about ourselves and about relationships and about people that we process life through, including psychedelic experiences, including mystical experiences, is something that we often aren't accounting for. And because of this, it's something that what I've found with psychedelics, it's often doesn't get touched in psychedelics. It's a corner of our awareness that we often don't go to because we're not aware it's there. And that psychedelics won't lead you necessarily to re-imprint. There are exceptions. There definitely I'm not saying it's a hard fact that it won't go there. I'm just saying it's less likely in my experience to go there. And so what we see is a lot of people who are not self-aware of their own attachment system and the filter that that's creating and the way that that's causing them to see and project onto life around them, and that's where the wounds are and where the healing needs to happen. So if you're seeing through that lens, you could just not notice that that's what's going on for you and have this big mystical experience, right? And this big mystical experience can, blow open your sense of self and help you feel connected to all of life and all of everything. But you're still not accounting for that lens of attachment that you're using to process all this information through. So what I think the relationship here is that I sometimes describe it like oil and water, and that sometimes attachment work and psychedelics don't naturally blend, and you have to kind of like shake them up. You have to kind of stimulate that cross connection. And if you do, there's like a real deep, amazing healing potential there. But mystical experiences generally aren't going to take you there on their own, in my experience. Instead, what tends to happen is we tend to go out beyond the self rather than going in into the corners of the self that really need it. We go beyond the self, and there's benefit in that. So what I'm saying here in one sense is that mystical experiences probably won't heal your trauma. And this is what I've seen over and over and over for people. The other side of that coin is that when we look at the data, when we look at the literature, like the studies Roland Griffiths and the crew did over at Johns Hopkins, for example, what we see is that mystical experiences often have a lasting antidepressant effect or anti-anxiety effect in a person's life, right? So what's going on there, right? Because that's a really broad, very medicalized, westernized way of describing what's happening when someone does have a mystical experience and how it could be beneficial. Let me offer a different frame around this, different language around this to describe what I think is happening there. So I think the value of a mystical experience is that there's a couple different pieces of value. So one is that it gives you a sense of self beyond the narrow narrative and identity that maybe you fixated on and are ruminating on that is causing a lot of the anxiety and the depression. So, if your typical, anxious, depressed identity is this small kind of bandwidth of experience that you've really honed in on and you're over ruminating on, and the more you think about it and the more you pay attention to it, the worse you feel, and your whole sense of self is kind of shrunk down to this very small thing, then generally what you're going to experience is just I'm anxious and depressed all the time, right? Now, if you expand your sense of self to encompass so much more, right? And you understand you're so much more than just this area of experience that's causing anxiety or depression. It, by contrast, really puts these areas of depression and anxiety into perspective, right? And I think this is one of the major things that mystical experiences do, is give us this big, broad perspective that helps us get a bit unentangled and detached in a healthy way, not dismissive, not ignoring, not avoiding that we might be dealing with depression or anxiety or what have you, but rather it gives us the room and the scope in our being to realize I'm so much more than this. This is just an issue I'm dealing with. And that distance and that kind of perspective, I think, creates a lot of room to go, okay, it's going to be okay. I got stuff to work on here. I'm not totally, free of, struggles or mental health issues, but I'm going to be okay. This is just a piece of my experience. It's not the entirety of who I am, right? So I think that's one of the big things that they do. I think that the other thing is that mystical experiences, by definition, involve a deep sense of connection to life, to everything, to everyone. A big part of why we tend to struggle with mental health issues is rooted in a sense of disconnect, right? Disconnect from maybe potential futures we want to experience or possibilities, disconnect from people around us, right? Disconnect from maybe a better time in our life or a different phase of our life. Disconnect is often at the root of a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety and a lot of mental health struggles, right? And mystical experiences, by definition, are connection to everything. So that's another way in which they can be this really deep, profound cure, in a sense. Not really cure, that may be the wrong word here, but antidote to that sense of disconnect, right? Another way that mystical experiences can really benefit mental health is that you learn how to kind of observe your own experience. You learn how to become mindful and witness without identifying with certain aspects of your experience. And, I do think there's a way that mindfulness and witnessing can be used to spiritually bypass and kind of disengage in an unhealthy way and just be more avoidance, quite frankly. And I've certainly done that myself. So I know how that goes. But I think it can also be a very, very useful tool to be able to detach a bit. And this is kind of, there's like, how to explain this? There's like a spectrum that I think of when I'm working with people as a coach and as a hypnotherapist and, guide and whatnot, where default consciousness, let's imagine, is in the middle. And as you kind of go up in consciousness, you kind of expand in consciousness, you kind of move into a transpersonal observer consciousness where it's almost like you can be an observer or a container for all the phenomena happening in your body, whether that's emotions, body sensations, thoughts, ruminations. There's all this stuff that can happen in our nervous system that we can watch and observe without necessarily feeling caught up in or identified with, right? And that's kind of like an expanding of consciousness or moving to a larger scope of consciousness where I'm this almost like bird's eye view watching all the phenomena happening in my body, right? And I think that kind of bird's eye view approach is incredibly useful when it comes to healing, growth, trauma healing, therapeutic work, personal growth, personal development work. It's a really big piece to be able to kind of get into that observer container mode cleanly and distinct from identifying with our narrative and our emotions and our feelings in the moment. If we're going to follow that thought, though, I do think there's a spectrum that goes down in the other direction, down into sub aspects of our experience. This is where we get into parts work and kind of what IFS does and stuff like this. I'll be talking about that in other videos. But just to kind of say that there's kind of a spectrum, there's a continuum, and default consciousness somewhere in the middle where I'm me and I'm a whole unit. I'm a thing, I'm a person, I'm an identity with a narrative and a story. We kind of expand up beyond that. It's like I am an awareness that is aware of the identification that this body carries. We go down into the subparts. We can go down from I'm my personality to I'm all these multifaceted parts of my personality. And then I am the feelings and the drives and the motivations and the pieces and aspects of those subparts, et cetera, et cetera. So a little bit of side note, but this is how I think of human experience. And for a lot of us, we lack the ability to expand up into that observer, container, wholeness self and allow whatever is happening inside of us to be there and witness it compassionately or curiously or, engage with it without getting sucked into it, right? So if I can see that I have a trigger, right, without being triggered 100%, that is a useful thing if we're doing some sort of therapeutic work. So mystical experiences, I think, really teach you how to get into that expanded observer wholeness kind of state. There are other practices in the guided course that I've made. There's actually quite a few different practices that I've included to kind of steer you into that kind of way of experiencing yourself so that this is not such a foreign thing and suddenly you're, doing a mystical experience and, totally confused about that or overwhelmed by that experience. So there are other tools and techniques that you can learn that are, again, in this course that can help you develop that capacity. But I would say that capacity is one of the things that mystical experiences deliver that is very, very useful for mental health purposes, right? So that would be the other thing here. Let me see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Honestly, you know, there's also a case to be made for mystical experiences delivering a sense of intimacy and support and connection with life, even if you're in a situation where perhaps you feel like you're all alone, or you feel like unsupported, or you feel disconnected from others around you. To feel connection with at least life itself can be a real game changer and lifesaver in certain moments. You'll notice I kind of like took a pause before I said that. And that's because I think that's not always a healthy mindset, to rely only on spiritual connection and to kind of be avoidant of human personal connection, or to, to kind of let that be an issue, but only go to spiritual connection, I think can be a bit bypassy and a bit dysfunctional. And I'm not always a big fan of that per se, but so in other words, I'm not always convinced that that's the healthiest thing. But I do think there's a time and a place to have big spiritual connection be your support system. Sometimes we're in a situation where all we got is our internal, right? And so that can sometimes really get you through. I know for me, that has gotten me through some really tough passages. And I've certainly seen people who are perhaps too reliant on others around them. And then when support systems, disappear or change or are unavailable for whatever reason externally, then people can really kind of flail and really struggle in those moments. So that might be another way that mystical experiences end up, being valuable. I would say also, we're kind of talking mental health here, which is kind of implies like issues, right? There's a whole other argument to be made for the positive psychology of mystical experiences, which would be that they invigorate you with a sense of passion and a sense of meaning and a sense of vibrancy and a sense of aliveness, that they, really can light you up, that they can really drive you and motivate you and help you feel centered and resilient through all the kind of, twists and turns and bumps in the road of life. And there's something really beautiful about having a grounding in a spiritual essence and a spiritual experience that gives you a lot of strength and resiliency and certainty that I think is beautiful and really valid. So that would be another, I think, really big mental health benefit. So, okay, let's wrap this section. Let me just summarize all of this, my thoughts about this, and I'll leave you guys to think about it. So in summary here, just to remind you again, I had my first mystical experience at 17, right? I've done psychedelics for over 30 years now. I've had a bunch of mystical experiences. I've gone deep down the spiritual practice rabbit hole, gone deep down the psychedelics rabbit hole. I, deeply value them and I can't imagine my life without them. But if I'm going to be honest about the role of mystical experiences in your personal healing path, here's what I have to say about it. I would say that if your intention is to heal your trauma, mystical experiences may not be the fix that often they're kind of like assumed to be. There are a lot of spiritual practitioners out there, and I would say psychedelic kind of zealots who are all pumped up about psychedelics and marketing them, that would seem to assume or imply that a profound mystical experience is going to transform your trauma patterns. And in my experience, that is not true, based on my own ongoing experiment with it and those around me that I've seen really try to bark up that tree and not get the results they were looking for. So if you're coming to mystical experiences, you're interested in them for the sake of trauma healing, I would say not really the tool or the time for you. Could be beautiful, could be life affirming, not going to fundamentally change the trauma pattern, most likely. There are exceptions, but most likely not. If you want something generally to resource you, if you want something to generally help you feel expansive and connected to life and connected to your own wholeness and give you a sense of perspective on your issues, if you want something that deepens a sense of vibrancy and aliveness and a sense of connection to your own spiritual core as a positive psychology, life-affirming thing that gives you a lot of strength and a lot of ability to do the healing work, in that sense, I think they can be very useful, right? And like I said before, I can't imagine my life without it. And I really mean that. Of all the experiences I've had in my life, I would debatably put my mystical experiences at the top, at the number one most important experiences in my life. Debatable. I'd have to think about that more, but if I'm just kind of like shooting from the hip here, it's probably what I would put at the top. So, is that right for you and where you're at? Is that going to help what you need help with? I don't know. I can't answer that without, talking one-on-one with you more directly, but food for thought for you at least, So the guided mystical course that I've created, called the Guided Mystical Experience, I'm getting excited and ahead of myself here. I feel like is a very well-rounded package. It isn't designed to be as promoting as much safety as possible for you. It's designed to prep you as well as I can ahead of time. It's designed to give you all the information about set and setting and how to set the situation up properly to make it safe, and how to properly integrate afterwards and do real self-care, aftercare work afterwards. It's, I think, a very complete picture of this process. And I think the guided session itself is proper and really good. And I'm very proud of my execution on it. And I think for those of you that are curious or want to have this kind of experience, short of hiring an in-person guide to do it with you very directly and do all this prep work with you very directly, which would probably be much more expensive. This course is one of a kind in terms of this, from my point of view. If you're someone who, again, needs real trauma healing first and foremost, there's, I think, probably going to be other stuff out there that's going to be better for you. Spoiler alert here, that's my next project essentially, and what I'll be trying to get out later this year is my first of what will be many courses on trauma healing and psychedelics. So there will be that. And I can point you in the direction of other information that'll help you wrap your head around that and start to get you pointed in the right direction for that. But if you're feeling like you need that now and you're thinking that a mystical experience is going to be the thing for you, it may not be. So I hope that paints a clear picture. This is a little contrary to what other people in psychedelic space say. This is perhaps contrary to me selling as many courses as I can to you, right? Making as much money as I can. This is contrary to that. I want to represent the reality of this really as honestly as I can with you guys. And hopefully this is of use and of service to you. As always, if you have questions, leave them down below, or comments, disagreements. I'm interested. And I truly wish you all the best. And I'm so excited to be doing this work and to be sharing with you and to be able to offer what I'm learning here on YouTube. If you haven't yet, I'll be saying more about this and I'm terrible about this. Please consider signing up to the email list just in case this becomes a topic that gets, deleted off of YouTube or whatever else. I'd like to be able to stay in touch with as many of you as of you are interested. So without further ado, have a beautiful day. Take care. And I'll talk to you guys soon.